We'll kick things off on today's objectives. Again, one of the big pieces that we're going to talk about a lot is how to communicate your story. A lot of media, when they're in communication with you and looking to place a story, or maybe it's with somebody in your organization, they're trying to tell a story that they want to tell. But a lot of what we'll talk about today is how you can help to drive the narrative of those conversations and what that media interview process looks like. In terms of the importance of preparing for that is really defining what those key messages are. So as you go into that media interview, whether it's you or a colleague, somebody may be speaking on behalf of you for your particular facility, and you've got to make sure that they have all the correct information. How many times have we seen somebody that's done an interview on your behalf and maybe they didn't get all the full information? And so it's really critical for you as a sports turf manager to make sure that you're proactive in preparing them with those key messages for difficult topics. And then ultimately what we want to do is once you have that conversation with media, whether it's local, regional, national media, you're turning them into an advocate. And you're turning them into somebody that is positively telling your story, which ultimately helps to lift the entire industry, the perception and the image of the industry. So those are some of the key objectives that we'll touch on today.
And kind of diving into, what we want to come out of this and why we do this is, we ultimately want to, as much as you want to control the storyline, media is going to kind of go where the story is, okay? But as we kind of build relationships with, as Glenn said, local, regional, national, as you start to build this rapport with whether it's just reporters in your area or beyond, that rapport you've got with them allows you to kind of create positive awareness and have your voice heard throughout any media coverage. It allows you to control the narrative, and what we ultimately want to do is, we see on social media, and particularly on Twitter, following field experts, it's a very engaged, interactive community, and there's a lot of great conversation that's driven, and so within the industry, there's a lot of really good things happening. What we want to do in 2020 and beyond is reach beyond that kind of endemic media and sort of reach beyond the typical audience that might be familiar with the industry. So that can come from things, on the local level, like if you're hosting a charity softball event and working up to, at the NHL level, a storyline we're working on is with the folks at the Minnesota Twins just announced that the Winter Classic's headed there. So, that's a high-level example, but kind of a chance for media to get to know members of the STMA in a way they wouldn't typically. So it's not your day-to-day baseball game there at Target Field. It's going to be, the NHL Winter Classic coming to town, and we're trying to tell that story from the members of the STMA's perspective and kind of reach beyond the typical coverage that you might see within the industry. This is something that will come up throughout the presentation, but we ultimately want, we're here as a resource, and we want to push your story out to media, but ultimately we want to streamline that process, and if we can get media coming to you to talk about your facility, something that we talked about yesterday in a meeting with the board of directors is the storylines that you all have. They're more interesting than you may even give yourself credit for. Well, we find a lot with Buffalo when we're reaching out to media to pitch a storyline. The response is almost instant in some cases. It's a very cool thing. You all are working very closely and right next to like a large target audience of sports fans, and to kind of tell your story, the behind the scenes, and how the fields come together that these moments are created on in athletics is a really appealing storyline. So as we mentioned, we're kind of going to go through a few video examples to sort of go through the X's and O's of what to do and what not to do, and kind of get the room engaged on sort of where improvements can be made on certain interviews. And so I think the next individual you'll see here on this slide will be a familiar face to many of you, and has some of the more memorable interviews or media interactions throughout his career. And so we're going to just play a video and then talk through how, of course, the context is different between, local media and a member of the STMA speaking with them, and, the Patriots head coach being interviewed. But the point of this presentation is to take away practical things from each that you can effectively apply to your interactions with the media.
This is where it gets fun.
Stay home and talk online to real CPAs and EAs on demand. Get unlimited tax advice and answers. Plus, 100% cost.
So this is this particular interview is not this one, not this ad. This first particular interview, there's a couple that we'll show throughout, and what we'd like you to do as you look at this is just think about what he has done well, if anything, and what you think should improve in terms of communicating his story, his interaction with the media, and I think we can probably all get a pretty good sense of what's going to happen with this one, but have a watch here.
If we have any personnel announcements, we'll make them when they're completed. Yeah, I don't know what the bubble is, so yeah, I don't know who that is. Yeah, I don't know who that is. So.
Philip, how does the team evaluate other 90-man rosters and try to identify players that would be worth trying to acquire via draft pick, and which players might be available towards the end of camp on the waiver wire?
That's what our pro-personnel department does. So that's what they do. It's a full-time job.
Did you get a chance to watch some of the interviews?
Tennessee, Philly. I saw that one.
Seeing the first weekend of the pass interference?
No, I haven't really caught up on that, no. Okay, good, thank you.
So, we'll go through a few different examples, but I think that some of it's pretty self-explanatory. But we're going to talk through some of the tactics. So, can we point out some things? Anyone, where we might start with how we could improve Coach Belichick's engagement with the media in this instance? Energy. Yeah, I think that's a key one. And we see that kind of throughout. It's a pretty consistent thing with him. If we're going to give Coach Belichick any credit for his media engagement, I think he's got a brand. Now, whether that's for better or for worse, that's up for debate, I suppose. But certainly lacking energy. Anything else that we saw in that interview? Very cool and calm. Yeah, you're certainly not gonna break his composure. There's some positives to be taken. While I think being forthcoming in most instances is a good thing, there's times to be withdrawn, and certainly one of the things we'll talk about later is you don't want to be at the mercy of the question or have the interview go in a direction that you're not comfortable with. So we can say that with confidence that that's not the case here. So certainly a positive there. Any other thoughts or feedback on Bill here?
How about his demeanor? If you were a media member and you were writing a story and you were interviewing Coach Belichick, coming out of that interview, would you be feeling warm and fuzzy and positive about dismissive? That's great.
Yeah, so something we'll talk about throughout the presentation is kind of the before, during, and after of an interview. And certainly one thing you want to leave the impression of is that it's an open-ended conversation. When you interact with a member of the media, you want them to be encouraged to come back to you and have you be the subject matter expert, if you will. Media in this case is kind of obligated to come back to the Patriots press conference, but this demeanor obviously doesn't encourage that. It's not an interview that many look forward to having. So essentially, that's kind of what we're going to take away from this one is energy and charisma can go a long way. Creating an open-ended dialogue, a flowing, natural conversation. We'll get into some of the easy tips you can just have in your back pocket to make sure that's something that you're doing in any media interactions. So as we talked about, we'll kind of go through the sequencing of how you can, prepare before, during, and after. As we mentioned at Buffalo, we're here as a resource to you and some folks in the room today and many beyond. We've arranged interviews with local media, regional, national, and that's kind of where the homework starts. Is we're here to help with that process, but the more you can do to prepare, do your homework on the outlet that's coming to you, kind of what they're. Think of it from their point of view. Put yourself in their shoes. Kind of what's their, what's going to be their narrative and why are they there to get a story. Keep that in mind when you're preparing your speaking points and your messaging. We hear a lot this week of very technical terms, and there's a lot of innovation happening within the industry, and it's second nature to many of the attendees here this week. To many media members, that won't be the case. And so a good tip is just to remain as jargon-free as you can, kind of, simplify it for them. Make it so they can easily digest it and make it relatable. You are the expert, but kind of translate to them, if you will, throughout, whether you're talking about field safety regulations, playability, temperatures on fields, anything like that. Just think, kind of simplify it for any media members you're interacting with.
Just show of hands, how many of you have actually conducted a media interview? Okay, so more than half of the group. And how many have helped prepare or have been involved in the media interview for your organization? Okay.
Yeah, and so, yeah, that's kind of the key piece is, we just don't want at the end of the day for this to be a one-off thing. We want to kind of create that ongoing dialogue with that media that you interact with. And ultimately the tips we'll dive into a little later in the presentation are kind of things that should help facilitate that for you. So before, very tactical, simple things, but to prepare for the interview, you're going to want to, and granted, this is kind of thought through the lens of a TV interview. So if that's the case, you want to know simple things on site, like where you're going to be looking, who you're talking to, whether it's at the camera, at the reporter, things like that. And then the other piece is just to, again, know why you're being interviewed, what ultimately the reporter's hope is, and sort of how you can help facilitate that while driving your narrative. These are all kind of important things to blend together in your interactions. The triangle method is kind of something that's been proven pretty effective. It's essentially you would come up with your top 3 messaging points, and you just think of the interview through that structure. While you're not asking the questions, you can kind of shape the narrative of interactions just in day-to-day conversations, as you know, and kind of think of it that way when you're interacting with a reporter. So you've got your triangle, and anything that you discuss, it will go off topic. We know this. This is just how the nature of any interactions go. But be able to bring it back within that triangle. Try to tie almost everything into your 3 messages, and this kind of creates a really tactical very easy way to go into an interview. Just 3 things kind of in your back pocket that you want to come back to throughout the messaging.
So one thing I would just add before we jump into actually during the interview is that it's not like you're necessarily going to have 2 weeks to prepare for an interview, especially if it's broadcast, right? So having the ability to activate and move quickly on preparation for a media interview, it may be less than 24 hours. It may be less than a handful of hours. You may have a camera crew that shows up at your field. So having these things prepared in advance, knowing what those 3 key message points are, even before you get wind of a potential interview coming your way to you or to your organization, it's very seldom do you have this ample amount of time to get ready for that interview. So if you're not prepared and that media interview falls on your lap, the potential of making a mistake or not hitting the talking points that you want to hit for your organization becomes that much more evident. So, if you don't already have some of these things that you're thinking about in mind, like, well, what would happen if this media interview were to come together? Or what would happen if, this TV crew were to show up in my field? Just being prepared, even if that interview is not necessarily evident right in front of you, is going to help you in the long run.
Yeah, and kind of as we move into the actual engagement with the media, we've talked a lot about, do your homework and find out kind of what they want to get out of these these interviews. What their final product's going to look like. Something that helps them certainly is strong quotes, and so that's going to be something that you don't want to necessarily come into the presentation with I need to deliver this, this, and this as a line, but out of that triangle method that we talked about, we can kind of come to these quotes will be born naturally out of it, and that ultimately facilitates the piece for the writer or the reporter. Like we talked about, be ready to go off topic. It's going to happen. Things will, if you're kind of talking about your playing surface or something in particular, say you're hosting an all-star game that weekend, talk about that, but be prepared for potential spin-offs and sort of where the conversation may go. It's something that, you as a subject matter experts will be able to anticipate a bit, but again, we kind of talked about that jargon-free interaction. If you can avoid that and just think of it through the reporter's lens, they're coming into it with a different point of view, be prepared for things to spin off topic and just kind of go with the flow. And then, there's kind of two different conversations. There's one talking like this where it's just face-to-face, and then there's certainly a different element when there's a camera or a microphone on you. And I think the tendency that we see sometimes is running on or over-answering or kind of diving too deep into things. And so it's important to remember to just be concise and quick, and that will allow for an easy flowing conversation, and that will allow it to go. It gives you more opportunities to cover more topics. Everyone's on a time budget, and that certainly applies to everyone here. So the more you're concise, it saves your time, it saves the reporter's time, and makes the finished product a bit easier on everyone.
And probably the one key takeaway, say, for an actual interview, preparing for it and during it, is professionalism. So looking the part, having, the colors of your organization, whether it's a shirt or maybe if it's a sit-down interview, it's a button-down and a tie, but hats, sunglasses that are on your head does not look professional. We know that you're out in the elements all day, every day, so we know why. You may have a hat on or sunglasses, but taking them off for the interview, looking that person directly in the eye, having that direct conversation with them, it's that much more of an authentic media interview. So something to think about. And Buffalo's created kind of a one-pager that essentially helps you to prepare. And it's little things that we all know, but it's just some kind of subtle reminders. It's like, okay, that's right. As I go into this interview, so we have that as a resource, and it's something that you should hopefully put into action, but feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. Again, it helps to improve and lift the entire image and perception of the sports surf industry. Yeah, and as we wrap up later in this presentation, we want this to kind of open a dialogue between us and everyone in the room today. We're here as a resource for you. So you guys are out there every day and know the storylines that are occurring at your facility, and we're here to help you tell that story. So we'll have our contact info at the end of the presentation, but that's certainly the role that we play and can ideally be of value to you throughout the year. We're going to go to our next interview here. Going to stay within the NFL in another one of the more memorable interviews, even as of recent. So we'll listen to Marshawn Lynch here for a few minutes and kind of do the same thing we did with Bill, see where there might be room for improvement.
How about the effort of the offensive line? Just to keep pounding it against the Kentucky defense.
Yeah. Okay, hold on 1 second.
What about the effort of the offensive line to keep pushing against the defensive backs aggressively?
Yeah.
How does that defense compare to others on the team this year?
Yeah.
Marshall, you were on the sidelines for a little bit there. What was going on with the back line? Obviously, you got back in.
Yeah.
How important was it to keep the ball on the ground and run out the clock, especially in the fourth quarter when you know this team is so good in the fourth quarter?
Yeah.
How does your back feel, Marshall?
Yeah.
Do you have those heating pads in your cleats?
I got a foundation dinner at the Edgewater on December 14th.
to help benefit the inner city youth out in Oakland. We're trying to raise money to build a youth center. So, yeah.
Edgewater Hotel?
Yeah.
Marshawn, every win is big, but could you talk about this one against Arizona today?
Yeah.
One of the big games against 49ers next year.
Yeah.
How you feeling?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the defense today and how they played out there today?
Yeah.
Anything else on the gas tank?
Yeah.
We're talking about Will Boozy. You got any questions about that? Oh, yeah.
Boosie.
My bad.
Get that kid, right? You're getting that kid.
He's
Well, you got, it was hard guards on the ground that you're going to make up for it. As we go on the back, that part of the game plan there, or?
Maybe.
Marshawn dancing with the cheerleaders at the end of the game. Is that something you just let land, or is that kind of spontaneous?
I don't know.
Still having fun, Marshawn?
Yeah.
serious questions. It could be tough to rebound for Thursday if it's kind of sore banged up in the season.
Maybe.
What did you listen to on the bus going over here? What was your song of the day that you chose?
No juice.
Well, shall I talk about the Cardinals defense?
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways for those spotters? Sorry? He made eye contact. He did not make eye contact. He did make eye contact. Okay. Okay, so it's positive. Yeah. In a sense. Yeah, one of the few positives. Sure, what else? Was not engaged.
I think we heard concise out here, which we just talked about. You want to be concise and efficient, but perhaps not to this extent. Kind of repetitive, among other things. Other thoughts on it?
What about his unit? His demeanor. What are a couple things that stand out? Boom. Yeah. Stand up. Take his hat off. Now, it's really hard when you're a multi-million-dollar athlete. I can imagine the challenge of their communication part of that with all players. But you see it from coaches, it's their job, professional, hats off, most of them. So, a couple good takeaways there. As you can see, because he lacked personality in this particular interview, the media started to not take him seriously. Right? They started asking him questions just to, get a laugh, right? It became almost comical, unfortunately. So, and while something like this may go viral on social, especially in today's age, it's probably not the best look for his organization that he represents, or maybe necessarily for football. It's the same thing with McDonald, too, right? I mean, both interviews we showed today, we're going to show some others, but just a couple key takeaways that you don't need to be best friends with the media, but you should have a little bit of engagement, as we talked about here, and there should be a little bit of personality.
Yeah. So as you can see, these are kind of extreme examples that we're showing early on, and we'll kind of get into some more practical ones, but they're worth showing in terms of kind of how we can apply them to ourselves and some tactics and best practices moving forward. So we talked about the before and the during, doing your homework in advance, during, knowing where to look, that professional appearance, having your speaking points and using that triangle method to stick with them, delivering strong quotes. And then after is where we kind of continue that dialogue, which is this is a really key piece. You want to make yourself readily available for any follow-up piece. And this will encourage anyone that's interacted with you or your team to kind of come back to you as the subject matter expert. Once that rapport is built, we've seen it time and time again that we'll, at Buffalo Agency, we kind of have relationships with a lot of these folks that do want to speak to SCMA members. And in an ideal world, at the end of this, they're coming to you and you're not doing any legwork to facilitate publicity for your team and your facility. Some best practices, and then we'll dive into some, quote, worst practices. What you want to do is kind of state your message in a positive way. So everything that kind of comes out of your mouth during an interview is through a positive lens. Obviously you're there to be an advocate for your own facility and your team. So this is something you want to do throughout. It seems like a given and an obvious that you'd want to be positive, but you've got to reinforce that throughout, drive that point home, and kind of the speaking points that we talked about will help to guide that process. Putting the message in context, again, this comes back to kind of knowing why the media is there and what they're hoping to get out of it. Knowing that piece of the puzzle will kind of help you to facilitate what they need. And like we just saw, and a dramatic example with Marshawn certainly, but in your instance, an unengaging interview is not going to bring them back to your facility and position you as the subject matter expert like we've hoped. During the interview, like we said, having a microphone in front of you or a camera is just a different dynamic, and so it's important to kind of it gets better with time and more practice. Certainly, that's how this happens. But as that continues to happen, you're focusing on the interviewing, you're having a conversation with them, and this will produce the most natural and organic results. And then most importantly is, again, not approaching it from a nervous standpoint or feeling like you're on defense. Doing that homework and preparing in advance will allow you to kind of control the narrative and remember that you're providing what ultimately is going to come out of this feature.
Pick on Jimmy for a second. Jimmy, we bring several things for Jimmy. Jimmy, what would be a positive message point if you were to do a media interview today about your facility, about your organization? What's probably one positive message point that you would have in mind, prepared as you go into that interview, specific to your job? That's right. So key member, right? That's if I'm the media member on that, and I'm taking away, right? And that could be one of his three message triangle points, right? Another one could be safety, right? Another one could be playability of the service. But the key takeaway, too, is that that message point is really driven home with that media member. The next time a topic comes up about team collaboration, or comes up about safety and community related to sports fields, and this is in a very positive media interview for that media member, they are more likely to go back to Jimmy and say, I had a great interview with Jimmy Simpson about safety and playability of sports fields in our community. I think he'd be a great expert to talk about this topic. And now, from one positive media interview, now you're going to get a second story, a third story, a fourth story, and it really starts to go very positive with you and your employee.
Now, so as we kind of continue to talk through best practices, we're going to flip to another interview that I think we can take some positives away as opposed to the first couple that we saw. So quickly, we'll hear from Tiger Woods here in a brief interview.
The last thing I would add before we jump into the video too is, and this goes back to maybe an earlier slide as well, follow-up, it just kind of goes to the example with Jimmy, is creating that relationship with the team member, and you take the counterpart, you exchange contact information available if you need to have a future interview. We know some of your organizations are very strict about, we don't want them going right with you. Communications department, and that's fine. Share that information to your communications person at your organization. But the one
thing that I always found as a nice touch is once you get that person's contact information, just sending them a handwritten thank you note and saying, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to interview the topic I look forward to helping you in the future. Something that's a very small touch can go a pretty long way building that relationship with the human group.
All right, so quickly we'll hear from Tiger in a casual, just finished his round interview with David Faraday.
To you, my man. Thank you, Jimmy. Down here at Tiger Woods. Tiger, kind of a strange week. Off to such a good start, but then it seemed like the long and the short of it, the driver and the putter, everything in between worked.
Yeah, pretty much. That's about it. It was just one of those weird weeks. You know, I didn't really feel comfortable with my swing, especially today. I hit good yesterday at the back nine. Unfortunately, I didn't do very good today.
Well, you know, I mean, how does a week like this make you feel? We know, I mean, Bubba, you know, really had a good chance to win, but he's going to feel like he had a pretty good week this week. And Lucas, depending on if he doesn't win, he'll feel like he had a pretty good week. I mean, do you feel like a loser?
Well, I did. I was. I wasn't even first loser either.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, it's difficult to think of you as a loser, but hey, you're a loser, and good luck next week.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tiger.
So let's talk about some things that maybe Tiger did well in this interview here, where you know, we can apply it to. Again, if you have a reporter coming to you, you have an idea of what they want to talk about. Tiger had a good idea of what he was going to talk about there, what happened on the 14th hole, how was your swing today, what went right, what went wrong. What you typically don't prepare for is to be called a loser on air after you finish your round. So let's see if we can identify some positives that came out of that and something maybe Tiger did well during the flow of that interview.
David Faird is a very big media personality, so if you were to ask Tiger off this interview, the background by David Faird, he could probably tell you all about his professional career. And so that's right, doing the research on that media member, looking through, even if somebody you don't know, looking through like their social feeds. One thing that you can quickly get a sense of coming into an interview, something positive or negative, is some of the recent topics. If you have an interview with a media member who's been very harsh about chemical use, I think that's probably going to be a positive interview going into it. So you've got to know that your background, you've got to be able to spin that story, pivot at the end. You might get some tough questions. It's the same thing, around like the reporter that their need is bankruptcy. Not much positive about bankruptcy, right? So going into the media interview, they're probably going to have a particular agenda. So, but the research and just the fact that Tiger has a relationship with David Faraday, you can just kind of tell the way they communicate is very natural.
Yeah, so we kind of take away the rapport that was there, the context that Jimmy highlighted, the thinking on his feet, the sense of humor. All things where, that our triangle method wouldn't apply to something like this necessarily, but being quick on your feet and prepared for the conversation to go broader is certainly something we saw here. So on the flip side, we highlighted some best practices, some things that you'd want to avoid throughout any media interaction. A lot of this we've talked about already, but getting drawn into speculation, not knowing the audience, this all kind of comes from preparation. To avoid those kind of top three things, this is where that method of just having your speaking points, not making it a fixed script like we saw in the dramatic example with Marchand. It's not a fixed script, but it's something to help just guide your thoughts throughout any interactions. And again, we don't want to assume that the person talking to you has as much knowledge of the industry as you do, because that just won't be the case, and that's why they're there, and you're there to help inform. And so, you would approach the conversation different than you would with a colleague here at the conference that kind of has that wealth of knowledge that you all share day in and day out. And then lastly, I think, again, we kind of keep hammering home this point of it's easy to kind of break character or, get nervous during something where you're on camera. It's important to just kind of remember that the media came to you for a reason. They're there to tell your story. So you don't have to sell that part of it. It's your job to just inform, create a compelling storyline, and move on from there with the after portion of what we talked about in the media process.
You only get better with repetition. Colin said that earlier today. You may not get a lot of repetition, but the one way that you can practice, just like our athletes do on your fields all day, every day, is potentially doing some role-playing scenarios with colleagues of your communication specialists in your office, with other members of the team, and have them ask you really tough questions, and have them video, and then watch it, and then see how you perform, and see if there's things you pick up that you may not realize you're doing. Maybe you said 15 times in a 5-minute interview. Maybe you're constantly touching your face, or there's certain things that you may not realize you're doing until you actually see yourself on the interview and on video, and that's only going to help you get to be more natural, more authentic, and more engaging with media members.
And I think that's important to remember above all else is, this can feel like a lot to remember to go into a 20-minute interview. At the end of the day, if you're engaging and positive and making eye contact and telling your story in a really positive, open-minded, relatable way, that's all you can do to form a positive impression and kind of build that rapport with anyone you're interacting with from the media. So on the topic of worst practices, we're going to head back to the NFL with a brief interview that I'm guessing many people won't even need me to press play on here, but we'll go through it and talk through kind of some things that may have benefited Dennis here.
Picks against Grossman and 2 fumbles. What do you see about the Bears? We shut them down that way.
No, we just the Bears are what we thought they were. What we thought they were. We played them in preseason. Who the hell takes a third game in a preseason like it's boop? We played them in the third game. Everybody played 3 quarters. The Bears are who we thought they were. That's why we took the damn field. Now, if you want to crown them, then crown their ass. But they are who we thought they were. And we let them off the hook.
Thoughts here on that brief interaction? He got his point across. He strong quotes. We saw some strong quotes there. I love the group's enthusiasm to find the positives in a lot of these interviews today. But so certainly, yeah, could have probably used a better delivery. Composure might not have been there. Other thoughts?
About his body language. Before that even first question has been asked, he's leaning in, he's grumpy, and it just sets the tone right from the start. You can just tell he's you. Right? And rightfully so, he's even performed. But obviously, probably not the best mindset for him to be nice. He's actually has to be in front of media after a game, but essentially maybe some of his colleagues in the communications department could have helped better prepare him. Now, I mean, easier said than done. As high profile as training, but with that being said, it just he kind of came right into the interview and it took 1 or 2 questions.
Yeah, and a lot of the context here is, certainly not directly applicable where, you're at a podium fielding questions from dozens of reporters, but some things apply, here is we can take from here. Kind of think through things and just don't react emotionally to questions. Remember that, you're there to kind of help shape the narrative and you can kind of steer the interview the way you see fit. That's something that we'll talk about here in the next few slides as well. So we've talked about kind of the before, during, after from a 30,000-foot view. Now we'll talk about kind of that actual interaction and answering questions throughout. You want to have your plan, but not be too rigid in that. Kind of be able to have that loose script to help guide your thinking coming in. You're prepared, but not necessarily glued to it. We've talked about avoiding the technical answers. The questions you want to answer is, you can literally drive questions to yourself. I mean, it's not something that you want to do throughout. You certainly want to take the reporter's questions into context, but you can sort of steer it towards your speaking points and kind of lead them to the water, if you will, and kind of get them to ask the questions that you're hoping to answer. That's something you can do just through that preparation and kind of, being natural and organic throughout and having those points to guide your thinking throughout. Not that this would necessarily be applicable, but you don't want to answer with no comment. There will be tough questions many times, but that's why you do your preparation and your homework beforehand. Is you can always sort of take those questions and tie it back into your speaking points that you've had prepared beforehand. And then, something that, of course, you want to have is you want to be able to expand on those points, but ultimately everything that you offer up in an interview, you want to be able to tie it back to factual information. And, while we highlighted earlier, we want to avoid real technical terms and jargon and industry relevant terms. It's okay to use those to back up your points, certainly, that you're making throughout, because we do at the end of the day want to have facts and statistics to back up what we're talking about.
And if you could ask a question, or you've seen an interview with someone that says no comment, how does that come across? Right? You're hiding something. Exactly. And whether you are or not, saying no comment is not positive. If you don't have the answer, if you don't want to, you're not sure exactly the answer to that question, it's okay to say, I'm not entirely sure the answer to your question right now. Let me get back to you. And especially during where maybe it's not a live interview, that's much easier to do. But I would say that if you get a tough question and you're just like, oh wow, I wasn't prepared for this, this is just the way this interview is going. Saying no comment is probably one of the worst things you can say. So just let them know that you don't have the answer to this question, but let me get back to you, and that's usually a pretty effective way to still keep the interview moving. Doesn't take anything.
And we talked about kind of doing your research beforehand, but kind of beyond that, when you're interacting with any reporters or writers, you want to know kind of what they're there for. Why there's a preface of what they're there to talk with you about. You've kind of got that in your back pocket, and then it's just thinking through. A good story is just kind of facts that they have from you. They'll get them from you, but the great stories are made with effective storytelling, and that's where kind of your personality can come through. If they can kind of identify with you, and this isn't just something they could have pulled off of a website and gone forward with. You're kind of the human element that adds context and makes these things real, these stories real. And so that's important to kind of take their storytelling to the next level. And, we just can't stress that enough, kind of the charisma and positive interaction, shaking their hand, looking them in the eye, and being really convicted in your messaging. You can be very confident heading into these interactions because you are the expert and they're coming to you. Let that shine through in your interactions with them. Something we talked about quite a bit throughout the year in our conversations with the STMA team is kind of proactive versus reactive. The media will kind of go where the story is, and sometimes that's not always positive. If it's relative to chemicals being used with the field, a slew of injuries, there's negative storylines out there, and we can't be naive to the fact that media will go to that. It's not a bad thing for you to have a voice in that. Just because it's a negative storyline, it doesn't have to be a sunken ship, so to speak. So we can kind of, basically, the effort that we make throughout the year to try to engage with media kind of builds that rapport. And while it's not plausible to have a personal relationship with every member of your local media, certainly, we're here as a resource to you to kind of share your storylines throughout the year, position you as a subject matter expert, and then ultimately, when these negative stories do come along, if they do, we hope they don't, we're less in defense mode, and you've already got yourself positioned as the subject matter expert, and will likely have a voice and be able to kind of share your point of view on anything that may have happened. So, it's not possible to just simply be out in front of every single storyline, but there's steps that we can take to be more proactive versus reactive when it comes to negative storylines.
And all news is local, so it's not every week New York Times or NBC magazine being at or for an interview. Sometimes those local radio stations, local blog, weekly newspaper, sometimes those get incredible engagement in your community, and they're widely read by stakeholders in your surrounding area and your employer. And so take all of them very seriously, even if it's an outlet you're like, well, this is just a local newspaper. But that does get great engagement. And so, whether it's local, regional, national media, they're all important. And so something to keep in mind.
And we're certainly here to play a role within that, and Glenn's just going to talk a little bit about the resources that, as Buffalo Agency, we're here to provide you 365 days a year.
And that's one thing that many of the members know, but it's something that we hope to take away from this week at the conference is from a media perspective, from messaging, PR, social media, all these things. We are the agency partner for SDA, has been so for many years, and we can only do so much of what we know from you. So coming to us with storylines, coming to us with media that's trying to tell a story about your organization, about your facility, we need to hear from you. And we manage the SDA social media channel, so it could be as simple as sending a direct message to the Twitter account, or Instagram, or it could be just sending us an email and then allowing us to help you. We are a resource for you, for your organization, and you shouldn't be going at this alone. We don't expect you to be experts in media. You don't expect us to be experts in managing sports fields. So we want to make sure that there's that relationship with each and every one of you. And there's a lot of information that we can help as you prepare those interviews. Sometimes if you're not even preparing for an interview, just to get brushed up on industry data and some key message points and things that are happening at the local, regional, and national level. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we provide a media engagement strategy. Just kind of give you a couple of different points on how to prepare for that media interview. And again, some things are kind of pretty simple. Others, you may not have thought of that can help just increase the professionalism of that interview. And ultimately, we just want to make sure that we can advocate on your behalf and just tell your stories. And we know that each and every one of you has a compelling story to tell. And sometimes it's really hard to pull it out of you because it's rather loud. It's just not inherent to this industry. Let the field do the story. If the story's not told, that's fine. We need to change that mentality that it's okay to be a little bit more proactive about your brand, about your role within the organization, and be willing to have that communication internally with your communications marketing department and say, I'd really like to be available. I'd really like to be a resource to talk about all the great things that myself and my team do to support our athletes on our sports field. So, again, we're here to help, and certainly we'll be hanging around after this session, and we hope that you'll communicate with us, and we know we'll be doing the same to you. Many of you have probably been contacted by our team, and we'll continue to push that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I would just add to that I think as we sit here and we know your day-to-day is so busy, and this, garnering a media interview may not be top priority, and this can feel like kind of an ambiguous process, and there's a lot that would need to happen between now and the time you were interviewing with a reporter. That's kind of what we're here to relieve that burden off of you. We want to kind of streamline that process for you, and from our standpoint, we pitch storylines from the local to the national level throughout the year, and what we find is these storylines are really compelling, and people within the media want to tell that story. So, you may sit here and think that, what about my facility would be a unique storyline? just get in touch with us, and we'll make that process really easy. It could be as simple as Glenn said, as a direct message on social media, but we're kind of here to streamline that process for you. And you should know that your storylines are more interesting, likely, than you're probably even giving yourself credit for. We see that a lot in our outreach. We'll go back to the screen here with one more example of a memorable interview and kind of break it down like we have been.
My fault. It's my fault we missed some free throws. It's my fault we lost both games. You know, it's my fault that, you know, we fouled to tie the game up, you know, with, I think there was a minute left when Luis fouled. That was my fault. It's my fault that they get easy layups. It's my fault that we, you know, not executing well in the offensive end. It's my fault that a couple people in the stands ordered Heineken, but they got Budweisers. It's my fault. I'm sorry.
A few takeaways from Tracy's interview there. Any thoughts? Yep. Not engaging. Yeah, I think we see there that, you know, it's just a fine line between kind of being light and humorous, having that sense of humor. That's a really good thing, and people respond well to that. You know, it kind of, you know, towards the end, we kind of toe that line of where sarcasm becomes a bit too much there. But ultimately, I think some positives throughout is he is very light and interactive, as opposed to some of the other interviews we've seen. So all just kind of helping to build out context here that, you know, there's fine lines between everything. You know, you want to back up your facts with statistics and factual information that you're using throughout the interview, but you want to avoid that over technical terms, you know, that the reporter won't be able to keep up with. And then you want to do your homework in advance, but not be too stuck to any kind of script going into it. So it's all just kind of a balance that we're kind of talking through here a little bit in depth.
What might be, so he took that higher approach, at least my fault. What could he have said maybe differently to have more of a positive note? I mean, it's okay that he acknowledged, okay, we had some challenges, things didn't go well the way we wanted them to. How can he have pivoted and made that a little bit more of a positive note? Even though we came out of the consensus humor, right? What would be an example? Maybe what's an idea of how Tracy was ready to maybe try and take that to be a little bit more positive? Any ideas? Sorry? Sorry, you basically touched on everything. Yeah. So the next time, you basically touched on everything that's wrong with the story where critiquing. So it's probably the ideas like we all recognize the issue. And he tried to take it all on himself. And he's the leader of the team, so that's the role he feels like he needs to play. But he's not the only player on the team. And so I think, you know, it's just a point of, hey, we're going to get back to work. We're going to go to practice. We're going to work harder. We know we got some things to focus on. We talked about a lot of today. And that's maybe a good way to kind of shift to be a little bit more positive. Not just taking these targets.
Yeah, certainly ways to kind of spin it more naturally. And, you know, while it left us with kind of an impressionable, funny quote as it applies to kind of our day-to-day interviews of, you know, more serious topics, there's something to be learned from that one. Yeah, and I think that's, to your point, this is something they do routinely every day, kind of getting in front of the media, and that pace won't be the same here with what we're talking about in the room. So that kind of lends itself to just being very prepared for interviews, and kind of ideally removes like the emotional aspect we've seen a lot in these interviews. Gives you the time to prepare, think level-headed, and give well thought out kind of answers throughout. Kind of diving into just some of these storylines we've talked about that we kind of pitch throughout the year. We kind of try to attach them to larger scale events. So whether it's the MLB All-Star Game, talking at the professional level, but applying it kind of down to the local level, if it's a charity softball game or simply just a field that has high wear and tear and kind of the work that you and your team are doing. These are things that generally spark interest from the media, and kind of simple storylines that when we're aware of, we can kind of advocate on your behalf throughout the year. We show an example here of Ryan Bjorn with the Patriots. A unique storyline is he's got a job that throughout the professional and college ranks and beyond, like many people have that role. The unique tie here was that he's got his dog with him day in and day out, and so that was a kind of the unique angle and produced that was sort of the hook, if you will, but ultimately turned into a feature on Ryan and his team and kind of the work that they do to keep Gillette prepared. And these are things that as you think through, I think now is a good point in the year to kind of pause and sort of reflect on what may be happening at your event throughout, or at your facility throughout the year. Kind of map that out, and again, just in a real informal way, just kind of connect with us, let us know what's on your radar, and we can kind of do the legwork to help facilitate some of these interviews that we've talked about all the tactics for today. No, that's a negative. So that would be a plus. If you've got a dog that can do a high five, please let us know. Yeah, and it kind of speaks to how we get to that audience, beyond the industry and sort of beyond the sports fan is, a simple thing like, now this is a relatable story to dog lovers, which is, expands well beyond just the typical reach we'd have in a story. So another practical example of something we see that's really effective is just offering a morning or an afternoon for a local crew to come out and follow you and your team in the preparation you do. This is a really visually appealing thing for media to come out and cover and kind of get some context of, show them the boots on the ground sort of and kind of how this actually comes to life and what's done every day. That's a really neat feature. So simple things like that, even if you don't have a kind of a unique event happening within the next 2 or 3 months, kind of making yourself available to local media is something we've seen a lot of positive response to.
We've got about 10 more minutes left, so I know we'll work through the last couple of slides pretty quickly, so we'll need a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, so a lot of what we'll talk about in these last few slides is kind of just diving a bit more into what we've already touched on. As Glenn mentioned, we want to leave time for questions. So we'll get through these fairly quickly, but kind of leaning on your own communications team, while we realize it's not as structured as, everybody has a VP of communications affiliated with their organization, there's always someone you can kind of get in front of and share that storyline with. And if there's not, I know we keep harping it, but that's our role here at Buffalo, is to kind of be that resource for you. So you guys have the knowledge of what's going on at your facilities and sort of what those storylines might look like. lean on those resources around you and take it seriously because, again, these storylines are very compelling, and we've seen the traction that they can generate. A few examples of some positive results throughout the year. I think we've got our own superstar in the back of the room here, feature on Tim and his crew on CBS Sports earlier this year. And, it's just a kind of a shining example of, when you're open to these opportunities, kind of, this is sort of what the finished result looks like. And we know, again, this can kind of seem like an ambiguous process to get from, point A to ultimately a published media hit, as we call it. But we're here to kind of alleviate the stress associated potentially with that process. So we'll do one final interview here to kind of pick apart, and then we'll wrap up with a few slides on social and dive into some questions.
Ceremony marking a return to the baseball spotlight. He's with Jim Gray.
All right, thank you very much, Anna. Steve, congratulations on the Latin ovation. Martin Steve, let me ask you now. It seems as though that there is an opening. The American public is very forgiving. Are you willing to show contrition, admit that you bet on baseball, and make some sort of an apology to that effect?
Not at all, Jim. Not at all. I'm not going to admit something that happened. I know you get tired of hearing me say that, but I appreciate the ovation. I appreciate the American fans voting me on that all-century team. And I'm just a small part of a big deal tonight.
With the overwhelming evidence,
No,
that is in that report, why not make that step with the opening?
It's a festive night to worry about that. I mean, because I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, just show it to me.
I don't have that report, but we don't want to make that, Pete.
Well, why not? Why do we want to believe everything he says?
Why did you sign a paper acknowledging the ban? Why did you sign it if you didn't agree?
Yeah, but it also says I can apply for reinstatement for 1 year. If you remember correctly in the press conference. Matter of fact, my statement was I can't wait for my little girl to be a year old so I can apply for reinstatement at my press conference. So you forgot to add that clause that was in there.
Well, you have reapplied, or you have applied for reinstatement in 1997. Have you heard back from Commissioner Felix?
No, and that kind of surprised me. It's only been 2 years, though, and he's got a lot of things on his mind, but I hope to someday.
Pete, it's been 10 years since you've been allowed on the field.
Yeah.
Obviously, the approach that you have taken has not worked. Why not at this point take a different approach?
Oh, when you say it hasn't worked, what do you exactly mean?
You're not allowed in baseball. You're not allowed to earn a living in the game you love, and you're not allowed to be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I think that was apply for reinstatement. And I hope that Spirit considers that. It gives me an opportunity. I won't need a third chance. I won't need a second chance.
Those who will hear this tonight will say that you have been your own worst enemy and continue to be. How do you respond to that?
And what way are you talking about?
By not acknowledging what seems to be overwhelming evidence.
I'm surprised you're bombarding me like this. I mean, I'm doing an interview with you on a great night, a great occasion, a great ovation. Everybody seems to be in a good mood. And you're bringing up something that happened 10 years ago.
Well, I bring it up because I think people would like to see you get on. See, we got to go. We got to
get. The prosecutor's brief is not an interview. I'm very surprised at you. I am really.
So we classify that as a tough interview, certainly. Quick thoughts on that and how Pete handled that one.
I thought he did a pretty good job early on in the interview, and just kind of addressing this question, tried to pivot, and unfortunately had a very, very difficult meeting member that just kept probing. And he gave as far as which is exactly the meeting member. We're still professional.
Yeah, absolutely. A tough one, but we can credit him kind of for the composure and, stayed professional throughout, which in an instance like that is really the best you can do. I know we're coming up on our time here, so we just briefly kind of want to encourage you to engage with STMA on social. Follow us at Field Experts. You'll see later today that we've had a really nice year, tremendous growth on social channels. And so we want to give you the opportunity to, while it might not be as traditional as getting a media member out there immediately to tell your story, we're kind of here to do that on your behalf on the social front. So Field Experts and tag us throughout the year. And emphasis is on you, the members, and the storylines throughout the year. And we'll leave our contact info up here for you to get in touch with us on anything that we discussed here throughout the day.